Welcome to Fkthry. I'm Joel,
And I'm Mike.
and we got a really special episode for you today. We actually recorded it back in August, and we're just finally getting it out now as the fifth
So
episode.
it was a good idea to kind of re-record this intro, as many things have changed, locations, faces,
Facial hair.
a lot is different. Yeah, hair. I pulled my beard so hard that my hair went right back into my head, and now I look like this. And so we thought it was a good idea to just kind of update everybody on the situation, because it definitely looks like we're stepping back into the past a little bit. But
Yep.
This episode is probably one of the best pieces of content I've ever been a part of in my entire music career. Seriously, it's pretty great.
It's really exciting, and I mean, we both listened back to it over the past week. We're going back and getting highlights and whatnot. And we'll be posting more of those, but of course, if you're listening to this, you'll get to hear the whole thing. But man, yeah, it's we really hope that we can have Austin on again in the future sometime, because this was just so much fun that we got to do it again sometime. So
Yeah.
with that being said, enjoy an episode we recorded back in August, and hopefully it's not too out of date, and hopefully you enjoy it. Cheers.
All right, welcome to the podcast, episode 7-1. Just for everyone watching now, this is actually round 2. We had some wonderful technical issues where the entire first attempt at this interview was, let's just say, destroyed.
Let's just say it was just me talking for an hour.
But we're back, and we're super happy because we have got the amazing Au5. All right. Yeah, bro, Austin, thank you so much for being such a good sport and coming back. It was a pleasure having you on last time. Unfortunately, no one will ever get to hear the depths of the conversation that we ended up at. So
no problem, dude. I mean, it's great just chilling and hanging out with you guys, and that's kind of what we were doing last time, just going deep in, the stuff that we would usually talk about anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Just straight down the rabbit hole. So today, why don't we try things differently, and instead of starting at the surface and going down the rabbit hole, why don't we just start at the bottom and come up? So, what is the meaning of life?
42? 42?
Okay, maybe we won't start that far
That's a
down.
bit deep, man.
It's hard to be lighthearted from starting from the bottom.
Yeah, fair. It gets a little bit too intense too quick. Okay, well, on that note then, is there any there was a question we didn't get to last time. Joel, you wanted to ask something, but we just kind of tangented for hours. What were you going to ask before?
I actually can't remember at all. Let me just try to think
great.
here.
We're super prepared.
Was it? I mean, we talked a bit about live sets, right? And
I think you wanted to. I think you were wondering. Oh, right. It was when you're dealing with sound design and writing a project, how do you maintain focus on continuing to actually add to the song and move forward without just spending like 2.5 hours on like one beat of music?
Yeah. So that's a tough loop to get out of when you're in it. And I think it's kind of hard to recognize when that starts to happen. But for me, I would say something that I do is like I'll start to feel when something is getting to where it needs to be, and I'll impulsively just jump to the beginning of the song and just try to kind of reset my microscopic focus on
Reset
a
his vantage
specific
point.
section. Yeah. And because that was something that has plagued. I mean, I think that plagues a lot of producers. But for me personally, that's just something that I've wasted so much time going so in on, and then the next day, this has happened so many times where it's like the next day, I'll listen to it. I'm like, whatever I was spending like 3 hours on wasn't even a good decision in the first place. So
Yeah.
I think
wasn't the right move.
I saw a meme like that where it's probably a producer meme or whatever, and it shows like what I made the night before, and it's like an amazing track, like a flume track or whatever, and then it's like versus listening to it the next morning, and it's just like the worst. Like, just I don't know if you've ever heard the reconstruction of the what's the Carnage beat that's really bad. It's like I think they played basically that, and I was like, oh yeah, I've definitely done that a lot. So
man, it's interesting how that happens, because I think there's noise fatigue, which is just like sonically we start to perceive frequencies differently. I guess like our ears kind of recalibrate our the spectrum in a way, but then there's also the more conceptual aspect of that, and I'm not really sure what you would call that, but it's like idea fatigue, I guess. It's like you're so kind of tunnel visioned that you don't really have a sense of what the big picture is anymore.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it has to do with your perspective, right? Because you're basically like, it's almost like you're using a microscope to paint. And then you're kind of stuck with that microscope, and you can't see anything else, or binoculars, for example. And and until you're able to basically pull yourself back, like you're really just kind of zoomed in on that specific thing. And I mean, that's basically sound design in a nutshell, right? You're working on something that most people will probably not know anything about what you're doing, but at the end, it's adding a huge amount of detail.
Right, right. And I mean, even, like, I think people who aren't technical producers, just like casual listeners, sound design is a very interesting thing to listen to for the non-technical person too. But I don't think that it is really nearly as impactful as it is for other producers, particularly of that style, to listen to.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of getting to we're talking about like making music for the audience of just other people like us
that
who
like sound
are
design.
technical producers. Yeah. And then it's like, why aren't we recognized as great artists? We put so much hard work into like innovate this sound and everything, but it's like ultimately you're still not taking a far enough step back to realize, like, as a whole song, you're focusing on the wrong thing. I mean, if your goal is to make a good song, it's not all sound design.
Definitely.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because someone sent me this video yesterday, and I sent it to Joel as well. I sent it to everybody. I should send it to you too. It's like the most annoying drummer in the world, and it's like a video of this guy playing along to like it's with a band. It's like a church choir or something like that, and it's like literally the worst case scenario, because this is a guy who has some technical ability on the drums, but absolutely zero musical awareness for what's going on. So the entire time he's playing, he's just sort of like, fill, like drum fill, like, look at what I can do. And it's like no actual musical awareness for like whether or not he's adding to the song as a whole, but rather just trying to demonstrate how much skill he has as an individual. And it's like, it doesn't matter how good you are. And so back to sound design, it doesn't matter how good this one sound is, if it's not actually adding to some musical concept as a whole that's going to be like digestible by more than just people who are super into sound design.
I completely agree. It's kind of like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried like drawing from life before.
Drawing. I thought you meant like drawing, like drawing how I drew the face on that plant. Like,
you
mean like pulling inspiration?
No, I'm referring to like literally like
drawing.
With a pencil and paper.
Oh, drawing.
Like,
you are me.
Yeah, okay. Trying to realistically draw like still life or someone's face or something. And if you haven't ever really done that before, or you haven't had any guidance with that, I mean, I've done that in the past, where it's like I'm trying to get as realistic and detailed as possible, and it's like, I'm doing these details really well, but then I'm looking at the thing as a whole, and I'm just like, the perspective is off. It doesn't look real at all. There's so much detail, but it's like, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, okay, that's really cool that you can do really microscopic gradients and shading, but it's like, as a whole, the whole thing is either flat or just makes no sense perspective-wise. And that's where the song parallel comes in. It's like, it's not a good compositionally. It doesn't matter if you're really skilled with the actual act of, creating details and stuff. I guess that would be the parallel to sound design.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make sense as a whole.
Well, I think
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that like ties into just like the idea of like, okay, what is a song and what is it doing? Because that's really like when you step back, that's kind of the question that I ask myself. It's like, okay, what am I doing with this song? And, you know, in a lot of cases, a guitar and a singer, like a singer-songwriter guitar, can actually get much closer to the purpose of that song because it's so simple and so easy for them to write, you know, many songs, and also their vocal range. Like everybody knows how to sing, like you know how to emote using that. You don't have to learn how to do that from a sound design standpoint. I mean, obviously you need to learn how to sing a little bit, but somebody that's kind of coming from the heart, it's, you know, for us, it's like, okay, how do we make this square wave represent this emotional feeling? When you sing and play the guitar, like you can kind of just pour your heart out and it just kind of comes across in the song. Whereas when we're doing it, it's like, okay, how do we do that, but with the math of what we're trying to figure out here?
Yeah, it's kind of backwards in a sense, because we have these technological advancements or at our disposal. We have the power to pretty much make any sound. I mean, we could synthesize a human voice if we wanted to, but then it's like, well, how can we capture the imperfections which actually make it feel alive? And that's the whole. That's the whole
and I mean,
thing.
like it's like when you see the humanize button on whatever plugin, you know, and it's like it's just making it kind of more wrong. It's not actually really humanizing it. You know what I mean? Like you know what I mean? It's kind of weird.
It's almost like
because like
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say because like when a drummer is like playing, you know, not perfectly in time, but there are like micro shifts between the placement of like hi-hats or snare drum or whatever. Those all come like in real time while they're playing because they're feeling the music that way, and it ends up working. But then if you ask like a computer to micro shift those things, it's just doing it by like at random. It's not doing it for a specific purpose, so it doesn't really translate into emotion very well.
Yeah, I think humanize is just such it's like an oxymoron, because it's like you're gonna have a computer do more computer things to try to make it sound less computer like.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it's the same with CGI, and this is all basically relies into uncanny valley is kind of how I see it. Essentially, you know, when you look at a CGI that's amazing, but then their eye doesn't like smile when they're when they're actually smiling, the eyes stay like dead. You're like, oh my god, there's something very wrong with this.
Yeah. It's weird how that's so specific to human faces as well, because I think we did bring this up last time. I can't remember how we got there, but we were talking about how you know, everything can look fine when it's like cartoony and animated or whatever, but it almost looks better and more realistic when it is realistic. It looks more appealing to watch when it's actually more on the cartoony side, because when you try to really replicate you know, a person's face or something and you're trying to make it more realistic, it ends up just crossing that line where now you're asking me to believe that it's realistic, and yet it's still obvious that it's not, right?
Yeah, instead of I guess it's kind of like when you see something that's stylized, automatically our brains don't have to try to see that as something real. I think it's something that we can, and I don't know, maybe it's just cultural conditioning because we've seen cartoons growing up or something, and we've seen art, but we don't have to. It's almost it's like it's easier to know when something is wrong than when something is right, I guess. Just speaking generally, it's like when it's slightly wrong, it's way harder to determine, or in this case, if it's realistic but like slightly off. I feel like there's so much background processing going on in our brains that it's focusing on trying to make it either real or trying to disintegrate it into it being something artificial, that it's like we can't actually engage with what it is what it's expressing, and we're too focused on the superficial. We can't get past that first layer, determining whether or not that it's like a real thing. Whereas with a cartoon, then it's like, you know, automatically it's like, okay, cool. We immediately accept it and can see past it and can feel it more as it's a more compelling thing because we're already beyond the fact that we don't have to determine
It's
if
not
it's real.
real, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that it's very the idea that your brain just doesn't, there's a part of your brain that doesn't shut off when you're in that situation. So depending upon basically the level of disbelief. So when it's a full cartoon, you basically have to suspend all disbelief. It's not reality. It's 2D, and the physics don't match up. They're but you get to that point. It's kind of the lowest common denominator, right? You're essentially suspend disbelief at a certain point. And that kind of depends upon the level of detail or the level of depth that medium or like the artist has chosen for it, right? And so when it comes to sound design, I'm not really thinking about the timbre of the guitar that much, or the mix of a instrumental guitar piece, right? But when I'm listening to drum and bass, I'm listening to the tiny minutest frequencies. If the snare is slightly off, not fitting in the mix, I'm immediately noticing that. So I think it's almost like your brain activates different, it goes deeper and deeper depending upon how much detail is available to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I agree with that. I think lo-fi music, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't listen to it a lot, but from what I heard, it almost seems like, okay, we're already, we don't even have to, as a producer, I think it's a lot of times easier to hear the song because there's less detail, or because everything is already just obviously not perfect and pristine. Yeah. And I think that is part of what people enjoy about that aesthetic, perhaps. Is it sounds old and it's nostalgic perhaps, but also it kind of mandates that you don't focus on what's off about it.
It deletes that entire perception from your brain that says, oh, this isn't mixed perfectly, because it's instantly, if someone was to complain about that with lo-fi, it's dude, that's the point.
Right.
That's what it's supposed to sound like. And it's almost the more real something is trying to be, the more it has to be perfect in order for us to accept it. And I think I can't remember, I had one example I was going to relate it to, but one I remember is if you think about the way that an artist would paint a person. Oh dear God, my alarm! Jesus, that scared the shit out of me. That's my alarm.
I've known you for 3 years, and you've always had that, and it scares me every time it goes off. Just some guy screaming.
I swear I put this on silent. Alarms don't care. Anyway, so if you look at when a realist artist paints a person, it's if it's on point, it's good, and if they do a bad job, you're okay, that doesn't look good, even if they're much more skilled than I am at art. But then you look at someone like Picasso or something who would paint a person, and it's doesn't even look like a person at all, but you're this is better than the almost perfect version of a real person. And it's comparing that back to music, it's if you are trying to use a piano in your song, it's 100 times more difficult to make a piano sound good when you're using soft synths, because it always kind of has that MIDI sound to it. Whereas if you take that piano sound and you just decimate it to the point where you're this isn't even a piano anymore, it's this sounds better to me because it's not trying to be something that it can never actually be.
Yeah, it's way easier to accept it because exactly, it's not trying to be something. It's not trying to be. You're not trying to trick the listener. It's just here's just something crazy that doesn't exist in real life, and that's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Sweet.
I guess kind of related, but I finished up mixing for the past month and a half. I was mixing a rock album by my friend Kenny Ray. Super good. And this is something that I haven't done. I haven't worked with real live recorded instruments in, I guess, since high school, which is 9 years ago already. Damn.
Yeah, I'm coming. That's same. Yeah, I'm coming up on that time.
Yep.
Nutty.
Anyway, it's what I realized, my first approach to it is all right, I'm gonna make this sound super pristine and awesome, way better than what's these rock producers ain't got shit on me, and that was definitely not the case, because really quickly I learned that if I'm approaching real instruments approaching mixing synthesizers and heavily processed samples, it does not lend itself well to that kind of music. It actually feels less powerful the more you try to maximize it, is what I found. And a lot of the plugins that a lot of my go-to plugins for like mixing electronic music just does not respond to that kind of audio in the same way at all. And it was really tough for, I guess, like the first week. And I was like, I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to make this sound good. But I pretty much just did rough mixes of each one, and then about halfway through the album is like when it clicked. I was like, okay, I need to treat everything like I am letting what is already there ring out the best of what it has, instead of trying to mold it into something that it's not, which is I think what we're so used to doing in electronic music. We're trying to sculpt stuff, and in this case it's more like polishing and detailing than it is sculpting. It's like, it doesn't make sense to replace all of these drums with triggers. The same sample. Yeah, with triggers and samples. It doesn't sound as good that way. I mean, there are a couple where I would like have a very soft background layer just for like fullness. But yeah, I mean, like with what was it like? Yeah, particularly mixing drums is a totally.
Yeah, I was gonna
thing.
say exactly that. That's funny.
Like,
the
transient responsive drums. The transient responsive drums, it's like, it's not actually favorable to limit everything like we would usually do with heavy electronic music. It actually sounds bigger. So a lot of the processes that I was doing were pretty much just like simple saturation, just basic EQ, not even a lot of dynamic or multi-band type effects. And I found, and a little bit of Soothe, because I think Soothe is one of those special plugins that
I need that plugin. I can't afford it though.
Works well on everything. I use it on everything, dude. It's a worthy investment. But
dude, there was literally one, just a tangent for 2 seconds. There was literally one night that I was working on some vocals for a remix I was doing, and I literally was like, dude, I need to just call Austin and just ask if he can run this through Soothe for 2 seconds and send it back. I just needed to get rid of these S's. It was so bad.
Wait.
Anyway,
did you do that and I forgot?
No, I did. I never did ask you. I figured it out. It was a nightmare.
Okay. Okay, cool. I mean, if you really need me to do that, like, hey.
Okay, I'll let you know.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. In the end, a lot of it was just like doing the maximization and stuff in the master, and like not even pushing it hard. Like, I'm talking -10 LUFS. Anything louder than that actually makes it sound smaller, and it was a wake up call. Like.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and actually, like, because I came up listening to a lot of metal and rock music and stuff like that, and then switching from that into EDM when I did, it was so weird because, I mean, they're completely different animals when you're approaching the mix on them, really. And like the way that they mix like bass and kick drums, like honestly, like if you've there's this one song, I can't remember what it is. It'll come to me. No, it's not going to come to me. Wonderwall. It's Wonderwall. There's I think a Rick Beato video where he shows us the stems of those songs. And when he soloed the bass stem, I was like, what? It had zero bass in it. It was the weakest stem ever. It just sounded like a bunch of distortion recorded from a microphone that was in a different room. I was like, this is what the bass sounds like? But when you listen to the song as a whole, the whole thing sounds amazing. Yeah. And so actually this kind of comes back to the original question, which is about the focusing on the song versus focusing on the sound. But when you're mixing like a bunch of acoustic instruments in a rock setting, you really do have to like almost mix things together, like you said, from almost a master standpoint.
Yeah.
Especially with drums. And I learned this way later than I should have, because I'm a drummer, so I naturally spent all my money on mics and tried to mic up my kit and stuff. And then I'm like EQing each individual sound heavily to make it sound as good as I can. But long before I knew anything about nonlinear EQ and how any of that stuff works, and little did I know, when you have like 5 microphones in a room and then you EQ each one of them individually, you're throwing them all out of phase. And so you listen to the drum set as a whole and it just sounds like trash. And you're like, what's going on?
Yeah, that was another thing that was really hard for me to like get over the hump of mentally when I was mixing the multi-track drums, and I was like, at first I was like, this engineer, this studio engineer didn't know what he was doing. Everything is bleeding into everything else, and I'm just like, wait, how does anyone, like, how back in the 70s before we had triggers or whatever, how did we get it to sound that good and clean? And I realized it's like you got to treat it as a whole.
Yep.
Like, you can't do extreme stuff on each individual thing. Maybe a little bit of gating here and there, but like even with the gate, like with the snare hitting and then the hi-hat will come through the snare mic just for like a block, and then it's like, that sounds weird. It's like,
Yeah.
you really got to treat the whole thing as a whole.
I'm just picturing like a drummer going into the vocal booth one drum at a time and playing the parts.
I was imagining that too. I was thinking the same
He's just
thing.
like playing the snare, like he's like trying to do the fills.
Here's the tom part.
Yeah.
Dude, the toms would be the worst. You're just waiting for the fill to come through. You're like, okay, I gotta hit this rack tom on beat 3 and of bar 57. You got the sheet music for it on a stand. It's like one quarter note.
Yeah.
Just once in the whole song.
Yeah, it'd be very
Oh
tough.
my god.
Oh god.
That had
be
to have been
perfect.
done before, though.
Oh, I'm sure they
So
tried.
that couldn't
yeah.
have been the first time we that
Oh,
was
yeah.
thought of.
Yeah.
No way. I mean, of course, yeah. And I mean, I'm actually even coming back into electronic music, like, well, I mean, with toms, there's synthesized toms, but really who goes for that sound these days, like, especially like with what we do, we're kind of trying to emulate like the classic, like, overproduced metal music tom sound where it's got that perfect like stick attack with a little bit of definition and stuff. And so I went through like a bunch of my tom samples. I grabbed all the ones that were good, threw them in a drum rack, and I spent like a whole day and I EQ'd each one individually, and I was like boosting exactly the right frequency for each sample, and I'm like, this is where this sample sounds the best. And I forgot that when you want something to sound good in a song, you have to listen to it in the context of the song.
Yep.
It's not going to actually sound good with this EQ on it for every single song. So later, I'm like, man, this is perfect. I got the best tom rack in the world. No one's ever going to have a better tom sound than me because they sound great on their own. And then I threw it onto a song, and I go to write a drum fill, and I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. It sounds so bad. It didn't work at all. And I had to undo all that work I did.
Oh
It's
no. Hey, unless
yeah,
you want to
it's-
make a song that's just toms, maybe.
Yeah, the tom song. Drop the toms.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, going through splice samples, for instance, like, a lot of this stuff may sound, it's like, that sounds weak, or that sounds like way too harsh or bright or like muddy, because it's all soloed, and it's like, you kind of have to experiment, put it in your song to actually see if it works. Like, it's funny with toms, I got a pack from a friend of like 80s synthesized toms, like from analog, I guess, like analog
Oh yeah,
synthesized toms.
I know the ones.
And I heard them, and I just was like, I don't think I'm ever
Yeah.
gonna find a use for this. But then I was making a song that was kind of like a mid-tempo-y synthwavy song, and I threw them in there, and I was like, because I had other toms, I had like real toms that I was using like multiband compression and transient shaping on, try to like make them sound big with reverb, and they just weren't cutting it. And so I swapped them out with the new ones, and I was like, this is exactly what it needs. It sounds, I mean, stylistically, I guess, you know, there's a correlation there, but just the mix wise, they're not super snappy, which is what I'm always compelled to make drums. Like, let's get
Right.
that transient just clipping
Yeah.
plus whatever dB. No, they're really soft and dynamic sounding toms that have like a lot of noise and like nice mid range, and it was perfect. It sounded so lush and full. It was exactly what I wanted, and I didn't even realize it because of context.
Yeah, I think I noticed that with Tom specifically when I went and saw Porter live doing his Worlds tour, and he uses a lot of those 80s like those kind
Yeah.
of like drum sounds, right? And they're like, when you listen to them on their own, you're like, this is messy. It'll be hard to mix this into a song. But it's like again, relating right back to what we were talking about before, not trying to be something that it can never be, because that sound is so specific. When you do hear it, it just kind of blends into the mix, but it cuts through in a way sonically that you still hear it, and it totally gets the job done really nicely without having to do a bunch of extra work trying to sculpt it into the song. So it's weird. And another sound specifically that really I've always I don't know what the word is. It always makes me think is the 808 cowbell.
Yeah.
You know, the one that
Yeah.
that's in so many songs, and it works every time. It doesn't matter what song it is. If you put that sample into a song, it just kind of sounds good.
Yeah.
Who the hell came up with that
And
sound?
it's tonal too, which is like it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting sound.
That's something that I was thinking about a while ago too, because these sounds, like the 808 and 909 kits, these were from like late 80s, early 90s, right?
yeah.
How did they know
this guy?
that? Yeah, nice.
I got that.
Whoever designed those, and I guess it's a weird paradigm. It's like, did the music come, like, how influential was the sound of the music, or were the sound designers really just that forward thinking that like this is going to work in the context of a lot of different kind of music?
There's actually I watched basically a documentary specifically on the 808 and kind of the development of it, and I can't quote it perfectly because it's been a really long time, but I'd highly recommend everybody look into it because it's amazing basically what was happening there. But it was basically developed in Japan, like completely separately from most artists basically, and then there was a few models that were basically sent out. It wasn't crazy popular when it first came out, and basically it was developed in, I believe it was developed in Japan. And then people started to pick it up. So I'm pretty sure they were just incredibly ahead of their time. And basically, because I don't think that sound really was at all in use prior to the 808 coming out and Roland basically coming out with those sounds. If I remember correctly, yeah, they actually basically pushed like a lot of like, you know, the 808 bass and all that kind of stuff. I think it might be on Netflix. See if I can find it.
I'd like to check that out.
Yeah.
That seems pretty risky too, because it's like there's nothing prior to that coming out that sounds anything like it.
Well,
So it's like, how could they even, who would have thought that actually sounds musical or could be used musically?
Well, and a lot of the reasons why it came out the way it did is actually just purely the limitations of the technology, like the oscillators that were actually, because I don't think it's a sampler, like it's actually generating most of the sounds, right? So the
808 is, yes.
So those sounds they basically were like, okay, well, we have these transistors and these resistors, let's see how we can make this make sounds. And that's basically what happened. And I may be wrong on this, but I'm quite sure that essentially it was just, instead of going from, you know, analog samples, they're like, let's do it all digitally. And essentially they, you know, the hi-hat's just white noise with, you know, an envelope or a filter on it. And yeah.
Actually, I think that like the crash cymbals or the ride cymbals in the 808 is all FM. From what I recall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because they have tonality to them.
Yeah.
But a very dissonant tonality.
Yeah, it's like tss, you're right. It totally sounds like FM. I've made that sound by accident.
Yeah,
Operator.
same. It's definitely not what I'm looking for when I come across that sound. That's the thing. It's like, who would have thought to put that in a thing that you sell for hundreds of dollars for musicians? It's like the last thing that I would have thought of.
Here we are 30 years later, and it's worth like $30,000 or $40,000 for one that's like barely functional anymore.
And a whole, like a huge chunk of different scenes of music
all took it.
are using it. Yeah. And it still sounds great. It's like, okay, I need a crash cymbal. Why doesn't my crash cymbal sound like, you know, clean and bright enough? If I'm using like an acoustic crash, I'm like, it just doesn't cut through like everything else. Just layer just the 808 crash, don't even filter it.
And it sounds so good.
And it sounds perfect. And that's it. That's the thing.
It's so weird. Because again, going back to the other thing, like if you're soloing that sample, if you listen to that 808 sample, the crash on its own, you're like, this is painful. This is not good for my ears at all. Like, what do I would never want to hear that. But then you hear it in the context, and it sits in this one register that nothing else is in. And then when you mix it at the right volume, it cuts through the mix without taking away anything else, and then just sits so nicely, like on its own. It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's very weird. And also,
but like,
go
ahead. No, you go. You're the guest.
Can I go now?
I was just gonna say, and how did the 909 hi-hat become such?
Well, okay,
a
that's
thing?
funny. That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah. Okay.
So with the 808 things, it's like what I can imagine, if like I haven't seen the documentary, so this is completely speculation, but I have to imagine that they're like, we want to create a product that doesn't require, any drums. And again, limitations of the technology, it would be easier to just do this all digital than it would be to try and make a machine that can use samples, because then the hardware is going to cost significantly more money to have that much storage on it, because they probably, hard drives weren't exactly great back then.
Mm-hmm.
So it leads me to wonder, again, with your other question, are those sounds so, are they so good because they were the first, and then when we started to try out those drums, we started using them, and then we mixed everything around those drums because we were limited to what the machine could do. And so like a bunch of music started coming out with all those sounds in it, and then maybe at first it was weird, but after a certain amount of time, generations later, we've heard it so many times that now here in our future, our present, it's like those sounds are such a staple of music that we naturally are accustomed to like them because we've heard them a million times, and it's got a certain amount of familiarity to it.
Right. It's like it's a cultural thing at that point.
Yeah.
Like it became that. But then to actually go to your question, with the 909, I'll bring this up again just because I like that I have it. So this is the digital version of it. This is not the real one. The real version, actually, a friend of mine has one, and it is absolutely gargantuan.
It's so big.
It has mechanical keyboard keys on it. Like it's like, it's like a big box. But the cool thing about the 909 is when they made that, let me just put this back. When they made that was when they tried to hybrid things, because they're like, we did the 808, but let's try and do something hybrid. And they realized that the one place they were lacking the most on was the cymbals. So they have the kick and the snare, and I'm pretty sure the toms are digital, but the cymbals in the 909 are actually sampled. So that's super interesting.
Yeah. I heard that too. I heard that the hi-hat, I guess all the samples, was recorded, or it's stored as a 7-bit PCM file. Because it was 7? Smaller, so it could fit.
Well, exponentially it would be.
Yeah. And but it's so noisy too. But it's that's another one of those things. It's like, okay, as like a quality piece of audio captured from the real world, it's garbage, basically. What we would consider these days garbage. But it's such a distinct sound that cuts through pretty much any mix, and it just works so well. And I think that again, I think that it is a cultural thing. It's like people hear the offbeat open 909 and they're like, okay, yeah, let's
Yep.
we're at the club.
Time to groove. Yeah.
And when I was a kid and started making electronic music in GarageBand, actually no, before that I was making.
That was your first DAW?
No, there was one before it actually called Easy Beat. It used the original, I guess, QuickTime synthesizer GRM MIDI sounds. There's like 128 of them, super limited, and I just wanted to. Because I heard the 909 hi-hat, offbeat hi-hat in dance music, and I was like, I need that sound so bad. And I got GarageBand and found out that they had it in their kit, and I just used that on everything, like, because it was just, that was something that I wanted as from a little kid. That was such like a tasty sound for me, and I still use it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You got used to it. You wanted to replicate that, and I think everybody kind of starts off wanting to replicate the things that they like. So even for me, when I went in to start like recording guitar, like depending on what bands I had been listening to as a kid, like totally influenced the way that I approached trying to mix my distorted guitar sound. Because if I was into like AC/DC and stuff like that, if I was born a little bit earlier, I probably would have approached mixing that sound entirely different. But since I was, born in the year I was listening to like Linkin Park and, all those bands that have that really overproduced, clean, distorted guitar sound, like oxymoron, clean, distorted, but you know what I mean? Like, and so
like
I wanted
non-colored
that
sound.
Yeah, very flat. It's like designed to be listened to on studio monitors.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The just a side note here for anybody that is listening in, for you guys, it's called 808, the heart of the beat that changed the music. And basically it's on Netflix, I think, and the picture looks like this. Looks like that.
Cool. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Another sound, actually, again, back on hi-hats, that I've noticed is with all the new hip-hop stuff that's coming out, I really like, actually, a lot of the sound of the newer hip-hop. I really like the watery, ambient, interesting color that it has. It's very pleasant to listen to on the ears. But there's a specific hi-hat sound that they use in all that music. It's like the... I obviously can't do it with my face, but it's you'll hear it in like all of like XXXTentacion's music and like a couple other people. But I had someone send me a song I was doing a demo feedback night on stream, and I had a hip hop producer send me a song, and he was using that exact sample, and I've heard it so many times. It sounds like a chirpy, like not a bird, but like chirpy is the only way I can describe that sound.
Oh, I know what you're
It's like
talking
a
about.
flange on it, and it's got like it's very
Yeah,
stereo.
it almost sounds like it's got a flanger. Yeah. And I was like, what is that sample? Where is it? And he's like, it's Fruity Loops hi-hat 1.
No way.
So, yeah. So like it really reiterates, because again, going back to like when my students are asking me about sound design and stuff, and they're like the same guy who was talking to me, he's like, how did they make that 808 sound that way? I'm like, bro, they did it by accident. They literally like put some distortion on it. It sounded good to them, and then they used it. And the reason why you think it's perfect is because you like the song. You know, it's not like, and then I rebuilt it for him, right? And so just to like reiterating that fact is like, I'm searching so intently for this perfect hi-hat sample, not realizing that everyone's using it because it's just the first readily available one that they found and then chose it.
You know what? Yeah. You know, a funny comparison to this? It's like when cool people wear like really weird clothing, it still looks good. Like if you're not, if you don't feel cool and you feel uncomfortable, like everything you wear just doesn't feel right. But then you're like, oh, that one cool. It doesn't matter what they wear. But it's not actually about the clothes. It's about how they like, carry themselves
it's about
around,
the person
and the
inside
person a little side.
Dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some weird fashion going around. I'm like, that looks like thrift store homeless person, or like you're like a like a middle schooler wearing
derelict.
Yeah.
Or like Crocs. I mean, I don't personally, no.
Yeah,
But
no,
that's why is that a
good.
popular thing, and why is that like, why are these like really cool, important celebrities, like, not specifically Crocs, but stuff like that. It's like,
I get it.
It's
yeah,
clearly
100%.
more function than it is fashion, but because of the context of who's using it or who's wearing it, it's completely recontextualized, and that's something that people are, trying to. It's something that people are looking to for fashion.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I feel like a lot of it is actually not about looking good. It's about being divisive. Because if you can split people down left and right and they start talking about it, then boom, your job's done, really. You just need to get people to start talking, right? So if some people are like, wow, that's the best thing I've ever heard. And like other people are like, you look like you just, you're homeless. Like it's like they're basically both.
It doesn't matter.
As long as people are talking.
Mm-hmm.
That's so funny, because that brings me to, I had a couple things that I was going to say about that. First of which I'll try and keep in order so my brain doesn't just derail. My sister's boyfriend is like a fashion designer, and I don't know shit about fashion, like really. So we were in like one of those high-end stores, and he's like pointing it out. He's like, how much, how expensive do you think these pants are? And I'm like, I don't know, like just off the top of my head, trying to over guess it. I'm like $600. He's like, no, they're like $2,000. And I'm like, what the fuck? And it's like, they don't even look good. They have like this stupid, like ugly thing. And he's like, the trick is it's not that they're like perfect, but like with high fashion, some of it is kind of an eyesore, like on purpose. It looks almost stupid, but then because of that, it accentuates all of the rest of the things that you're wearing. So you don't wear like a bunch of crazy looking things at once. You wear like a low key shirt and pants, but then like a weird jacket, or you wear a normal jacket and a wax t-shirt underneath, And it's like, that's what kind of like the juxtaposition against the two is kind of what grabs people's attention, because you're showing like class mixed with fun, right? And it's like interesting.
I think there's definitely parallels in music with that. Like, I think I guess going back to like the weird watery 808 music, there's a snare There's an 808 snare that I was looking for a long time. I was never a fan of it, but it started growing on me more and more. It's like the chirpy. It's the chirpy,
is the Lex
like
Luthor sugar snare.
It's
Is it that one? 'Cause that's
it's
the one I always
probably
hear.
that one.
Yeah.
It's got that weird chirp in the beginning, and it doesn't, but it cuts through everything. It's basically just like a brick, though.
Yeah,
It's
I think
like,
that's exactly the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
it sounds like it was
I
just
gotta
like
send you a snare later.
multi-banded like several times.
Yeah.
But that's used in, like, I hear Virtual Riot using it in Rhythm as like the snare.
Interesting.
And there's everything around it is like super pristine and clean and huge, and alive sounding. And then there's that snare in there, and it works really, really well somehow. And I think it's
like
the juxtaposition. It's like it sounds better than if it would have just been like some big giant splashy snare, which we would expect of that style, for the past decade.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of like if someone were to send me a song that was like basic dubstep music, and I heard it, and it was, mixed normal with a normal dubstep snare, and they captured the vibe of like what we heard a million times, I'd be like, cool, you did the thing, you recreated it. But if they did all of that, but then used a really whack-ass snare that I wasn't expecting, it would grab my attention 100%. And that's kind of like the thing that I've definitely been noticing a lot, and specifically with snares. We used to always, we talked about this last time, everyone was trying to get that Cohen snare, like, ping, like that ringy, boost to 200, layer it with a tom, do all these like special things to make it like fat. And then now there's like, you go to any Cymatics samples pack, and it's like, all of the snares are perfect. They sound exactly like that. You don't even need to mix or master it. It's not even hard to get that sound anymore. Yeah. And so everybody got sort of bored with it. And now all the snares that I hear, or even like just drums in general, look at Flume. All of the drums like sound like shit, but they sound like good shit. And
right.
That comes back again to when we're talking about the 808 and 909. A friend of mine told me once, I don't know if you know Adam Kirshen, Adam K. Soha, like,
yeah, I know.
The Cascader, yeah, he's a friend of mine out here, and he gave me a great piece of advice when I was like talking about samples, because I'm hearing all these samples that sound like garbage. I'm like, I would never use these samples, just like you with those toms. And he's like, every pooey sample has another pooey sample that it goes with, and we'll make them both sound good.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay. Yeah,
I could see that.
So the other thing then, the other thing I was going to say when you brought this up, Joel, I can't remember exactly what you said, but I do remember where I was going with it, is with the with the influence that it has when you use these sort of sounds. It's like when you choose to use something like different. Again, it has to be like the one thing or like the two things in the song that are different, because if someone sends me a song that is like completely a bunch of weird like experimental stuff that they've never done before and that I've never heard before, it's going to be like really jarring and complicated and almost like unpleasant to listen to. But when you have just a couple things that are weird but then balanced with a bunch of familiarity, it's a lot easier to start to superimpose those new ideas in, and you like blend it. You're like, hey, here's a little bit of the past with a little bit of the future, and then eventually that will shift, and then there'll be a new future, and this like weird new stuff will be the past, and it's kind of weird.
Yeah,
like it goes.
I think that's a great observation, and that's something that I probably learned a little bit later. That works, because like I've always been interested ever since I first started making dubstep. When I first started, I was just trying to recreate what I heard, just like really simple, like one or two patch wubby, like obnoxious triplety stuff.
Yeah.
And then I showed my friend who turned me on to dubstep, and he was like, "This sounds good, but it's like I want to hear something interesting. Like I want to hear something that I didn't expect." And so I was like, okay, challenge accepted. So literally everything that I made, it was just like, all right, here's 10 sounds and like 8 bars. And it's crazy. And at the time, I'm talking like 2010, 2011, 2012 kind of era. That was kind of, I think there was so much headroom unexplored, I guess, stylistically.
Definitely.
And that kind of became a thing. It's like complextro dubstep, I guess you can kind of think of it as.
Yeah.
It's like how many crazy, weird, syncopated, different sounds can we add in such a short amount of time and still have it kind of groove. And that was my thing for a long time. I love doing that because it's like before I started making dubstep, I was really into like IDM and glitchy stuff. Like I was really into like Square Pusher and Aphex Twin particularly.
Yeah. Oh,
and
wow.
Infected Mushroom as well.
That's out there.
So the combination of definitely the crazy cerebral stuff, I found that very pleasing. So it was like kind of a no-brainer for me. I was like, I'm just gonna do that. I'm just gonna push that to the limit. And then everyone else started kind of doing it, and then it kind of reached a critical mass and broke off into like really something super simple and way less maximized. Like Big Room, you know, we were doing some nasty, crazy, articulate, syncopated, complextro house music, and then 2013 happened, and then Big Room, and we have like
boom for 2 years. For 2 years, that train was all going. Oh man, that was the worst.
50% of that song is the kick.
I remember this, and I'll reiterate this because this is what brought this up last time in my mind, is that music has a pattern, and genres tend to follow this flow, where it goes from a new thing to slightly getting more complicated, and I'll just use the same example I did last time, which is with jazz. We had, you know, coming out of the stride piano era, then all of a sudden there's Dixieland jazz music, which is just like, again, unexplored, not really like pushing the boundaries, but it's like here setting the foundation for like what jazz will become. And then you get Charlie Parker, who's like, I'm going to make it more complicated, and starts doing bebop. And then you move on to that, and you get I can't think of the guy whose wife killed him. There was Lee Morgan into like hard bop era and stuff, and he's like, I'm gonna do like bebop with fast crazy lines, but like push it even farther. And like that kept going for a little while, and then eventually critical mass, and then Miles Davis was like, fuck this shit, I'm doing the cool jazz era, and he like stops everything and chills it right out. And then that like went on for a while, and then everyone started emulating that, and it got kind of boring and oversaturated. And then John Coltrane comes in and starts doing all this modal jazz stuff and like pushing those boundaries, you know, from that foundation up into its limits, which then eventually turns into like free jazz with 2 drummers and no music like pre-planned at all. And it's like critical mass, boom, rock era, chill rock, which was heavy when it happened, then boom, like, you know, metal, and then heavier metal, and heavier and heavier, like crazy progressive, like virtuoso stuff.
Yeah.
And then eventually that drops off, and same thing with electronic music, right? You reiterated that perfectly.
Well, keeping on with jazz too, I feel like Jay Dilla basically was where that ended up. He basically said, okay, well, jazz exists. Now, where can we go outside of that genre but still keeping it? And it's funny, the reason why I bring this up is I just heard a song that was a jazz band playing Jay Dilla style hip hop beats. So it's the next layer.
Whoa.
So it was like literally a full live jazz band, but they were actually playing a hip hop beat, and they were actually playing like jazz, like looped jazz lines. I was like, this sounds really, really weird, but it was really cool. Let's see if I can find that.
Hear that.
Yeah, it's just came up on YouTube recommended. Sometimes that stuff there can be some pretty crazy stuff coming up on YouTube recommended. I help find that pretty good for finding tracks.
I think, yeah, that does seem to be, history repeats itself in different, I guess like artistically as well. It's like another thing is think about like visual art or photography or whatever. The technology continued improving, and pictures and images became more vibrant and clear, and I guess eventually more sterile. And now we can buy cameras that aren't really that expensive and capture like absurdly high fidelity, absurdly wide dynamic range of light, and a lot of times, we don't even have like screens or ways to print it that actually can really represent that. But I guess my point is, it's like there's a point where we started seeing a lot of I guess like vintage Instagram filter looking
putting vinyl
stuff.
samples on your track, same thing, right?
Yeah. it's like, okay, you just made this a crappy film camera now,
Yeah.
but tastefully somehow. And it's kind of like the same thing with like lo-fi music. It's like let's record
all
this
the
whole
technology
thing
in the world.
let's record this whole thing to a cassette tape after we have
After
this
mastering
software.
it in a perfect studio.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like a sought after thing. It's because it's like, okay, yeah, it's too much of the same thing. So it's like let's drop it back and simplify it. But in this case, it's more of like a perceptive. I guess stylistically too, but more so like a perceptive thing, like how things are mixed. And you have indie music and lo-fi music and like new disco, and now we have synthwave, which is
like
like
the new version of whatever that was back in the past.
Yeah, it's just 80s music in 2020, but it's cool.
Man. It's kind of weird because even the concept of inspiration in general is literally taking influence from the past. It's just like every picture is a picture of you when you were younger. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, it just depends how far back into the past you want to reach into. And so sometimes, we get to this point where we're like, oh, we haven't explored that for a while. And I think it's when, a thing crosses the boundary from being old and out of date to then being nostalgic, right? Because it's like we get out of 80s music and we're not going to go back there for a while. We're not going to go back there right away. We went into 90s music and like hip hop and went through a couple things, but eventually it was far enough in the past that we were able to start taking influence from it. And it was like a cool reminder that existed, as opposed to like, oh, you're just out of date. Right?
Totally. It's almost like we need to fully remove ourselves from that era before we can actually go back to it and appreciate it like we did in the first place.
And I think it also dramatically relates to the cycle of basically a single person going through their childhood, and then you hit basically adolescence, going through your teen years, and then as you become an adult, you basically, I would say from like ages like 18 to like 23, you're basically just figuring things out. And then after that, once you're out of university, you're starting to do something that you're trying to find meaning while you're being an artist, and you're actually able to write those tracks. That's when you start to be like, okay, well, what is it that I was really like back then? And it's like, oh, well, I like all these little things like that I didn't even realize were influencing me at the time, but we're kind of doing that full cycle. And that happens to every single person that's ever lived, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I've been trying to kind of become more aware of again. It's like I was like, why? I'm thinking like, what do I always think of like, what am I doing with my brand? What am I trying to say? What actually is like really meaningful to me? I feel like everything is so convoluted and I'm being influenced by so many different things. I don't even really know who I am anymore, what I'm trying to say artistically. And I'll have to like, all right, what was childhood like? What was all the stuff that I was like imagining and pretending in my life? And I'm just like thinking now, a lot of those things, with the childish or childlike connotation aside, which is something that as we're growing up, we're trying to get away from that. We want to be independent adults because that's like false promise of freedom or something.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But going back to that and kind of letting yourself see it from, I guess, from a pure, broader perspective, it's like, I still love all of that stuff that I was really into as a child. And I don't think that's going to go away. I think that's really a part of me. And I think finding your inner child again and giving it attention is a healthy thing. It's like kind of returning to innocence is, we go away from home. We take this huge journey and it's like eventually, you just come right back. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's fulfilling.
It's really interesting. I guess I got to fire up RuneScape again and start grinding.
Yeah.
And Neopets.
Yeah. Oh God, Neopets. I didn't have any of those. I literally couldn't get into Neopets because I was like, I know that I will eventually not be into them, and I can't get over the idea of just never looking at them again, and they're all dead.
Well, they're all just they all just say famished because they've never been fed. Think about how many Neopets there are in the world that just haven't been fed in like 20 years.
All of them.
All
man.
of them.
Anyways, I'm sorry about that tangent. I just had to.
Maybe though there's like a crazy Neopets adult
reality
who's
an adult.
Hacking
their
all the
entire
accounts.
job, their entire purpose of life is to rescue all of the Neopets and make sure that they're fed.
That's the Neopets SPCA.
And SPCA.
Yeah. Oh man.
Oh man, that's crazy.
That would be.
But
There's
yeah,
gotta be someone out there that's doing that.
That'd be hilarious. And
wonder-
you have to like hack people's accounts. You'd be like, you're literally trying to hack people's old emails so you can get access to their Neopets accounts. So you can feed them.
And then there's the one guy who still works for Neopets, keeping the site running for this one other dude who's using it still.
God, I think that game's gotten a lot worse, but it's all like pay or whatever. But yeah,
Oh,
every once in a
God.
while I go in there and I fire up Meerkat Chase or those mini games. Those are fun. Those are actually pretty fun. But
Dude, actually, it's funny coming full circle about this and stuff, and it is relevant because I think about like how I love all the video games that I used to play as a kid, and it's like comparatively to the games that are out now, they're nothing. They're garbage almost, you know, in a way. But I still like those games, and I think they're like better than the games that came out now because the imperfections about those games, the way that you had to learn how to deal with the janky software that's trying to run the very badly written physics engine, like that's part of figuring out how to play the game, and it's fun because you can't just do it and do it perfectly. And I see like games today I don't play a lot of like RPG or games. I don't really keep up. The only game I play is Smash Bros. But like when I watch people play like Assassin's Creed or something like that, it's like, okay, you sneak up behind an enemy and then you like press a button and then it does this like crazy choreographed animation where it's like killing a guy or whatever, and it's like you're watching a movie and pressing okay next scene basically over and over again, and it's like that doesn't feel like a game to me, right?
Yeah.
So but it's weird because then I'm like, later in the future when there's new crazier games, those people are going to be like, oh, I remember back when it was like Assassin's Creed, you know, and like for me I'm like, oh, I remember, you know, Mario and like all those like crazy games, and then like my parents are like, oh, I remember good old Atari,
Pong.
you know, and it's like it's weird how that nostalgia becomes like built into you because you spent all of your time like falling in love with this concept back then, that it really never dies in that way.
well, that's when our brains are wiring themselves.
Yeah, I mean, our brains are so much slower, I guess, in its ability to rewire itself than we were as a kid. I mean, we were pretty much just like an empty hard drive as a kid.
I was just gonna say hard drive. I was just gonna say hard drive. It's like now I have to delete things to make space for new shit, right? I have to defragment regularly.
Yeah.
Before it was like, just bring it in. I got terabytes, bro. I just bring it all in.
Yeah, dude. I mean, Gen Z doesn't even know what defragging is, probably.
Which is crazy. Or cleaning the gunk out of the mouse ball. You ever have to do that?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay, we're definitely.
I
This is a
forgot.
bit of a boomer conversation, but
A little bit. Man, trippy. Yeah, I remember dial-up internet, dude. Like the fact that we're doing what we're doing right now is absolutely insane compared to what I dealt with when internet first started being like public.
yeah.
Yeah.
You pick up the phone to call someone and all you hear is you're like, hey, get off the computer.
Yeah.
The computers would scream at each other through the telephone.
Yeah.
And that's
pretty much exactly what they're doing, which is crazy.
So whack, dude. It's so weird.
What's crazy now is regular internet's literally just the same thing. They just scream a lot faster and they have their own lines.
yeah. They scream through light.
Yeah.
Oh my god, this conversation.
So I'm definitely not helping the
No, it's okay. No, because this still relates back, thinking about you know, nostalgia in your past, and like I have a lot to say about that because, you know, every now and then, you know, I think everybody goes through like depressive stages in life where they don't do certain things when they really should, and it's like I have all the ability in the world to be making music all day long. I live in a studio, right? And it's like I'm set up. I literally I'm in reaching distance of everything that I could have ever wanted. And as a kid, I'm like, all I want is that. Just give me a room that's my own that I can make music in. Like I would do things every day, and then all of a sudden I find myself like in a depressive state today where I don't do anything. And it's like, if I could have a conversation with my 13-year-old self, dude, he would kick me in the balls. And like, it's so weird thinking about like what that conversation would be, because it's like, if I could talk to my 13-year-old self and be like, what do you want? He would be able to give me all the answers to what I should be doing right now. And it's like somewhere along the way during the process of trying to become this person,
we lose sight.
I lost touch with that. You lose touch with it. Yeah, you lose sight of your goals, and you have to eventually look back to your past to remember what your goal was in the first place.
Yeah, I think those limitations inspired a lot of motivation and goal building and ingenuity. It's like I didn't have any money when I was a kid. I couldn't just go buy something on Amazon and have it show up the next day.
Yeah.
You know, whatever I want. I had a crappy computer with that barely ran GarageBand, and
yeah,
I juiced it as much as I could. You know, I got as much as I could out of that limitation. And I think it's interesting because, like, with video games, going back to that, I think a lot of, because I'm really not into new games. I like old classic games. I like Unreal Tournament and Deus Ex and that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah,
super limited in what they're capable of. But I think because of that limitation, the way the game was designed and written was so much more, I want to say, methodical and deeper. Because a lot of there's more of a, I don't know, particularly
they rely
Deus
on the
Ex.
story more.
Yeah, there's the storyline holds up.
And they're
I think a lot
they're
better
like
than
focused almost on what's actually important.
Yeah, they have their priorities straight.
Yeah.
And I think in music it's kind of the same thing, more or less. When you have the limitations of like having a modular rack, for instance, making music on a modular rack, or just like, you know, a really basic analog synth. You can't import samples and do crazy resampling or resynthesis, and you don't have Splice at your disposal. But I find that, and I didn't understand. It's like, why would you want something that is so hard to make it sound good? Like anything that could make, like, I could make it any other synth, and I wouldn't even like it because it just doesn't sound good. But now, I kind of wish I had that because, giving myself a limitation, it inspires so many more things that I'm depriving myself of unknowingly, creatively. I did a production challenge, I think like a year or two ago, with my friend Jetto, and it was on Twitch, and we recorded it, and the goal was he found Zelda Ocarina of Time, I think it was,
nice.
Sound font file. And apparently you can take sound fonts and drag them into Ableton, and they get converted to sampler instruments. And we gave ourselves like an hour or two to see what we could write with just these really terrible sound fonts, somehow creatively turning them into something. And that's all we could use. No synths basically no synths but those. Yeah. And I ended up making a song that was like, I would have never thought to make anything in this style, and that was really fun and really fulfilling. And it's like, wow, I want to do that. I wish I could come up with that kind of stuff, just like when I sit down and have the freedom to use whatever I want to create with. But I think there's like a give and take there. It's like there's option paralysis, and then if we have everything we want at our disposal, then we're just going to do the things that we're most used to. It's not going to force us outside the box. It's not going to get us into that critical thinking / flow state headspace. And that's interesting, I think, because like that, they sound kind of contradictory, but when you're on a time crunch, you don't have time to overthink things. So it's like, all right, this is a new thing, this is a totally novel thing that I'm doing. And I think there's a lot of inner work that goes into that, rather than just like sitting down at your DAW, open up Serum, FM from B, F minor, 150 BPM kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Well, as soon as you said paralyzed, that's exactly the word I had in my head as well. And I feel like I've done the exact same thing. My room is, I've surrounded. I literally just bought my 4th launch pad, so I've got 4 of those now.
You have to see this guy's setup. We'll talk about it some other time. It's cool. It's really cool. He can produce house music live. It's really cool.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
I'm actually using those to actually to actually reduce, but at the same time, I'm lying to myself. It's making it more complicated, but I'm also making it simpler. I have to be on the call with them for support because it's blue screen my computer now because apparently you can't do 4 of them at the same time.
What?
Which is why none of them are plugged in right now. But I just lost my train of thought entirely. Talking about paralysis.
Oh yeah,
I definitely just lost it all because I was talking about launch pads. That makes me really sad.
that's fine.
Yeah, well,
Option paralysis, doing the same thing. FM from B, 150 BPM.
Well, it's like having the actually kind of limiting yourself essentially is what. Okay, yeah. So I got it back. Sorry. Basically, when you first start, you don't have anything, right? And you have these limited tools at your disposal, and you make a track, and you value that track kind of on how it sounds against the tracks that you're looking for, like you're listening to. So I feel like the trap that you fall into, or at least that I fell into, is that, it's not mixed properly, or you don't know how to make these sounds. But the fact that it's not mixed properly and it doesn't have the right sounds is not really what's making it a bad song. It's more about like the actual kind of the fundamentals of the song that are making it a bad song. And, when you spend more and more time giving yourself more capabilities, it becomes harder to get back to that core idea of the song. You get that paralysis when really, when you have these big studios around all this stuff, you only really use all this capability in like the mixing and mastering stages. And maybe the writing process should be actually limited. So like when you're actually doing that writing, limit yourself to the tools you do. And then it's still handy to have, the full studios, the really nice headphones and all that kind of stuff for the mixing and mastering to do the polish. But that's really just the icing on the cake. What actually matters is how you wrote the idea in the first place, in my opinion. So
I think having an environment that is, and I think it requires exploring, like getting out of your comfort zone to know what actually inspires you, which then in turn puts you into a flow state that's actually fulfilling.
Yeah,
like I have instruments. I have a guitar, a bass, and keyboard right next to me. Oh yeah, and a mandolin back there. And I have this little keyboard right in front of me, and I only use it to press like one note at a time to preview samples and patches.
Yeah.
And I'm in the DAW sequencing something, and I'm like, why can't I come up with a good melody? And everything just sounds too forced.
Yeah.
Or
it's because you forgot to play music.
Yeah. And I kind of miss back in the day. I personally think my music, it was less well produced, but I think it was more innovative and more musical. I'm talking about like back in the days of like 2011 to 2014, when I was actually actively playing real instruments, like being in college and mandatory lessons, or like playing in concert band, or even just having a real piano in my house and jamming out on that was so inspirational unknowingly. Like that allowed me to I think it really just made me think outside the box, because I'm limited by what I'm able to do with my hands, and that's a good thing in most cases, because sometimes the simplest thing is the best.
Yeah.
I have to wonder if then, because that's super interesting. It's like, it's a lot easier to think outside the box when the box is this big. But when you're looking at Ableton, the box is so big and you're still trying to look outside it, and you're like, well, I'm never going to find the edge because it's an infinite universe in there.
Yeah, you walk around the box and you're like, wait, there's this other box called Max for Live. And then you spend 5 hours running around in that and you're like, I've never found the exit.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because and that's this is kind of the way I look at it. It's like everything that exists is defined by its limits. If something was everything, then that thing would really be nothing. If I asked you to paint a picture of everything, like paint me a picture that is of everything, what would it look like? It would be nothing, because you would never be able to see it at one time.
Right.
It's not possible. So something only becomes defined by what it isn't. You know what I mean? Like a piano is a piano because it's not any other instrument, not just because of what it is. There's like everything on the other side of it that also takes into account like what something is going to be. And it's like, if you write a song that uses every single note and is every single genre and is every single tempo, and it's like, what would it be? You'd never be able to define it, right? Or the genres are defined by their limits. You know, everything is defined by the limits that of the parameters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
With some exceptions. I mean,
Yeah, a
that
little
song that you showed me that you guys did.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's pretty freaking awesome.
That's a lot.
It's definitely suffering
thank you.
from having too many things in it, though. That's not, I mean, every time I listen to it, it's like there's a lot going on. But yeah.
Context is everything, I guess. I think I was in the right place at the right time to listen to that, and it
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah, well, thank you. I always forget, and even not even specifically with that song, but with that song as well. Like I finish a track, and then a couple weeks later, I'm like, oh well, finished another song. Time to make another one, and you kind of forget to like appreciate your own work, and then like sometimes you'll go back and listen to something that you made a while ago, and hopefully, if that song did stand the test of time, it's like I'll listen to some of my old music and be like, nice, like that was actually pretty good. I do like this song, I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing, I think, because a lot of the times I get stuck in like a perpetual system of never feeling like I'm going anywhere, because even when I, like I said, finish a song, it's like, okay, sweet, time to make another one.
Yeah.
I'm always constantly like never finished, right? And like when I used to do like tile setting for a little while, like that was such like under what's the word when you're like satisfied with the job well done? I can't
Satisfying?
remember right now, but yeah, it was very unsatisfying, to say the least, of a job, because especially me not being like a finishing person, it's like I would go to a job site, deal with a bunch of mess, grind some floors, blah blah blah, and then like the next day I'd go to work and they're like, okay, go to this job site and do that, and I would never even actually see the job finished.
Yeah.
So it was just so unsatisfying, right? And so like when you get to experience that satisfaction of a job well done, I think that's the sentence I was looking for. Like that really helps to keep you motivated, and sometimes you really need to take a step back and remember what you've done and not focus on what you haven't done yet, and that kind of helps keep things moving and keep you inspired, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the headspace of if the carrot is always in front of you, then I started from the end.
I get it. I get the analogy for sure.
Everyone's
It's
going
like
to
the
sit back and eat it a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's important to appreciate the present and where you are now.
Yeah.
I think people are afraid. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I'm afraid that if I let myself feel appreciable of what I have now, then I'm going to get complacent and I'm not going to move forward. But
Yeah.
find a lot of cases that you need that to be reassured, de-stress, and decompress. Like find time to relax once in a while, because once you do, then you're actually more ready to tackle the next big thing that that is your goal. Other than just like always being feeling like you're one step behind of where you should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the difference is between satisfaction and content. Because if you're content, you're complacent. But if you're satisfied, then you're just acknowledging what reality is, and you can still continue to move forward.
Exactly. Well, it's like listening to your track and being like, you know what, you can acknowledge all the great things and be like, wow, I'm the best. I don't even need to do it, and then make the same song again. Or you can be like, I did really good and I'm proud of that. But then these are the things I can still work on.
Again.
Obviously, where do I want to go from here? I'm not, this isn't where I'm going to end up, and kind of having that mindset. But I think it's really healthy to have that, basically those breaks, and actually not feel guilty with them. Because for me, like, I can do a crazy grind of work for like years straight, where I was just basically just working constantly, and I really like music. So if I'm not working at work, I'm working on music at home. But at a certain point, music becomes work as well, especially when you set deadlines on yourself. And like, I wouldn't take any breaks, or if I'd take a break, I'd feel guilty for it. And I think the key is to take a break and not feel guilty, and realize that you need it, and like say, I'm taking a break so that tomorrow I can kill it, and like actually, sitting back and not doing anything.
Something I read at one point that relates to that is how to stay motivated when it comes to
Is it the dopamine detox thing?
No. I mean,
go ahead,
that's definitely a conversation worth having. But
yeah,
in a way, I guess it relates to it. It's basically like if you're in the flow of like a song and you're really feeling it and you know what you are about to do next, and you're confident in it. And it's like if the day is closing, but you still feel like you've got a lot of motivation. Stop one step before you think you're going to stop, and then when you come back to it, you're going to start off with that boost because you already established what it is you're going to do, and then you get into that flow.
And maybe write it down or something. Actually write it down.
I have goosebumps. I've never thought about doing that. That's so smart.
You know that thing that you really want to do?
Yeah.
Don't do it,
Yeah.
and then do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's the same thing. So it's like writing down lists before you go to sleep because it's like, okay, I'm not going to do it today, but I'm going to write it down so that I remember to do it the next day. And then when you start your day, it's like, boom. And it also helps you fall asleep easier because you're like, I'm not forgetting about it. I wrote it down. And it's really similar to that.
Yeah.
I should do that as well.
Speaking of not forgetting about things, I remember I actually asked you this the very first time we had a conversation online about like those situations where you do go to sleep and all of a sudden you have every idea in the world. You're like, fuck, this is the greatest song ever. Like, why is it in my head now? Like, how often, do you actually take the time to get out of bed and write it down? Like, genuinely for me, I've only ever done it probably like 10 to 15 times where I'm like, I need to,
Yeah.
and like I'll get out of bed and write it and like do something. But other times I'm like, I'll just use this code that I made, and I'll open my phone and put in like some dashes and dots and be like, yeah, I'll remember this. I'll remember this. And tomorrow you look at it, you're like, like what?
Yeah, just like writing down like the just like the intervals of the chord progression as numbers and just no, it doesn't have
and
that.
And you look
soul.
at it, it's like 15951. Okay, sure.
Is that a melody? Is that a
phone number to a pizza place?
Yeah. Phone number. Yeah, man. It's
humming it and just recording a voice memo is like the tried and true, probably the best way to do it, because then you get the rhythm and the melody all in one.
Yeah, even
if you're good at singing.
I mean, you don't really have to if you just want to get the idea down, unless you're really, really bad. But yeah,
I do that a lot. But the funny thing is, it's like I never reference them. They're just all on my phone. Just
dude. Yep. I actually wrote down as like kind of like semi something to use as lyrics one day maybe or whatever, but I wrote down in one of my notes, I'm like, what's the point of writing all these notes if you never read them?
You wrote that down?
In the notes.
So you're literally calling yourself out.
Yeah.
With the method that you calling out. Nice.
Yeah.
Little
right.
fractal.
The little spiral. Yeah, exactly.
Of course.
I love that you knew exactly what I meant when I did this. It's like fractal, yeah. We're just spiraling out at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Well, we're an hour 21 in. That's pretty quick, dude. Time just flies, eh?
Whoa.
Wow.
It's like
that was nuts.
because we started from the bottom.
Idea. And now we're here.
Drake.
Started from the left and now we're all the way to the
right. And now we all right.
Yeah. I'll just put like a slow pan on the video so that like our cameras are slowly sliding to the right, but unnoticeably for the entire episode.
That would actually be hilarious. If it was
the amount
possible.
of dumb things like that we've tried to do, like we tried to pass a water ball one time just not acknowledge it the entire time. Yeah.
Because usually our screens are left and right like this. But yeah, good times. I guess right now I'd have to be like,
pass it down. Yeah.
Cheers. Yeah. Oh, there you go. That actually worked. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh no, I'm going the wrong way.
way.
There we go. Cheers.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, where's the center? Right here.
Oh no, it's above your keyboard.
Yeah. Oh wait.
Cheers.
I went the wrong way. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not in quarantine. We're just hanging out.
And we had this idea that because he comes to Vancouver most summers, and I don't know if you will this summer, but we'll do the regular video, but then I'll green screen a video picture of his thing,
my studio,
and then we'll pull the green screen down. Like, by the way, we're actually in the same place.
Oh, that's cool.
Just so much work, but because we never have actually done one where we're both in Vancouver, so that might be interesting.
Right.
But we'll have to cut this part out of the interview so that no one knows it. But what
Oh
really
yeah, crap! I
happens for
probably
real.
shouldn't have said that. Oh well, maybe it's a surprise.
Easter egg.
Yeah.
That's how you know that
Yeah,
they
it's
watched this
totally
one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, on that note, how much time do you have? Because we can keep going for sure, but it's up to you.
I've got to about 4:15 myself because I have a call for everyone 4:20.
What time is it right now for you? I don't
It's
even remember. I can't see
3:51,
my
so
clock.
it's like another 20 minutes.
Okay, we can probably do another 20 if you want.
I'm
down?
cool with that. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like there was so many potential tangential topics that
So
I
many.
just forgot about
Yeah.
that we were about to talk about.
Yeah, well, I mean, they'll definitely come up. There's always time. I'm trying to think. I mean, we started with, and we referenced it a lot, actually. We didn't deviate too far, but the idea of actually remembering to continue writing a song, even though you're starting, even when you're dealing with like intense sound design. So
Yeah.
it's like, do you think it's better to try and start writing a song by going in and like writing the whole arrangement out and then orchestrate it underneath? Or like what is your process generally for like starting a song? Like when you open a blank Ableton project file, what goes on through your head?
To be honest, and I wish it weren't the case. Like I feel a little bit hypocritical telling people like this is definitely a better method than doing it this way. It may be a better method. Sometimes it may be a better method. Sometimes it may not be. Ideally, the first thing is like go into it and don't take it too seriously. I think that's the first thing, because like whenever I sit down and have some kind of intention about how this is going to exist in the world externally, whether that be how are my friends or audience going to think about what this is going to be, or like hearing a song and I'm like, ooh, I want to do that, but better or something, or like put a twist to it, or like have this elaborate idea or this potential idea for something elaborate that seems like a good idea in the moment, and I try to get to work on that. When you're starting off with a blank slate, I think it's the most important to get into a flow state and not worry about all these technical things, not worry about like how it's going to be received, and I guess the what is it called? The logistical outcome. Because when I do that, oftentimes I'll just either abandon the song because I just like lose steam, probably because it's not actually coming from a genuine place in the first place.
Yeah.
I don't realize that until after I try it, or I'm having it just takes a really long time, and I'm working on it for months and I'm still not satisfied with it, and then I'll get some new idea. I'm like, ooh, let me just write this down real quick in a new session, and then that ends up being the better song in the matter of like a couple days, and it's done.
Well, it's probably also because you're literally building up all this energy. You're trying to write something, like you want to write something, but you're limiting yourself to that project file and the constraints of it. And you're like, oh, I have this idea. And it's like, nope. And then you're doing that for a period of months. So like for me, it's like you're building up that creative energy. The moment you step into a fresh place and you don't have any limitations, it's like, boom, go.
Yeah,
And,
you hit the ground running.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I would say
it's like you almost limit yourself. You almost like limit yourself to all your potential, tangents again, like of what your music could be when you're focused so specifically on trying to recreate something that, like, at the end of the day, any experienced producer will tell you is unlikely to turn out exactly like what was in your mind.
Right.
I really wish we had a way to plug in a little 1/8" jack into my brain and then have it plug in whatever I want, but unfortunately, it's really difficult to do.
Yeah. Got to talk to Elon Musk about that. I feel like he's probably working on that with the Neuralink, but
Hell
Like,
yeah.
are you working on a DAW for that?
please. But so anyway, going back, I think the best way to approach would be, if you're gonna write horizontally, and what I mean by that is kind of like write out the skeleton, try not to focus on sound design or mixing. It's important to at least for me, and I think it's the case with a lot of other producers, it's like if it doesn't actually sound good, like if the sounds you're using don't sound pretty good off the bat that you're using, whether it be presets or patches or stuff, and that's why I'm always about like doing sound design jams and making your own presets, but I'll get to that in a minute. Then that's not going to be enough to sustain you. I don't think, unless you have like a fully fledged idea out in your mind already, and you could theoretically just notate it on paper. It's tough to do that, just like flesh the whole thing out without doing like mixing or stuff along the way. But I would say if you have a good arsenal of sounds that you like, or like presets or patches and stuff that you can not invest a ton of time in, just like, tweak a few knobs, get it to sound solid, and then move on to the next thing. You don't want to lose that creative compositional flow. I think that can be found in sound design, but when it comes to composition, it seems to be a much more elusive, ethereal thing. It's like, you feel like absolutely. You may be on a roll, but spend one more minute trying to EQ that kick drum, and you might just lose the whole thing. You're
done.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even going as far as like, if you don't have a strong sense of like ear training or like interval understanding, like even like I have a melody in my head and you're like, okay, time to find the first note. If it, like for some people, and for me back in the day, if it takes too long for me to even just find that pitch to start it, I've already forgotten the melody.
Yeah.
Or, if I can't find the next one, right? So it's like you need to get those important things, elusive is like the perfect word. You need to get that elusive stuff on the screen now, because you can spend all day doing sound design later. It's easy. That's the easy part.
Right. And yeah, that's fun too. I think designating like sitting down and I guess asking yourself, do you want to write a song or do you want to make sounds?
Yeah.
Because they're very different they're very different things. I mean, of course there's a lot of overlap, especially when you're making electronic music. I mean, the opposite of that, but it's a parallel that would be an extreme case of that would be like, okay, go into the studio with your band and try to build your instruments real quick before you record. Like,
such a waste of time.
Yeah, you already have the instruments.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about that. You already have the sounds that you made and constructed. You don't have to worry about that. Yeah. So I'll either sit down and just open up a synth, and lately I've been using Edison, the image line plugin, because I really like the ability to just not be restricted to your timeline and just record audio and then just start throwing effects on and just recording everything that I'm making. And the great thing about that is you're not committed. You don't have to be committed to any sound. And I think even though you may not think, like if you're not recording, you may not think that you're committed to anything, but I think subconsciously you are definitely preventing yourself from doing a lot of explorative things, especially when you're starting to stumble upon something that sounds good, like a cool sound. You become less and less inclined to make broad strokes and change that drastically. And so I think just recording everything that you're doing, at least you have a good chunk of that good sound that you can just use, and then just save the whole thing as a stem and reference it later, or if you want to go through it and pick out the gold and then save those as stems later, or save those as
but
samples.
the options are there.
Sample yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when you go,
and it's like,
sorry, I was gonna say, and then when you go into the compositional session, you have your own sample pack of unique sounds that you are already familiar with. So it's like you can, it's easier to audiate what the song should be based off of what you've already heard because of what you've already created, and you don't have any guilt for using someone else's patches or samples. Some people, I guess it doesn't bother them, but for me it does. And you just reference that, and it's like, song can be fleshed out really quickly, and it's fun because it sounds good along the way.
I think that's,
and sounds like you.
And it's unique.
the idea of that you actually know where all the sounds come from is actually huge, I think. Just, I never really thought of it that way, but being able to be like, okay, I know kind of, you're not going to remember everything you did, but it's like you actually remember one or two of the effects you used on that. It's like, well, to make everything else sound like it came from the same place. And me and Mike were talking about this years ago when we were getting into resampling. It's like, if you want to build an environment, everything has to work together. And what's an interesting way to do that is actually start from a single source sound and build all of your sounds. And maybe not like, they're not everything is coming from that, but like a large amount of your texture is all coming from a single set of sounds. And I think the familiarity of having kind of that procedure, like knowing where all these sounds come from, it's like you're familiar with them all intimately because you spent hours kind of coming up with them. That actually, in a way that I don't even think about, actually probably impacts your writing in the writing stage quite a bit. Positively.
Are there are two things that I would need you to clarify. Are you referring to like starting off with a single sound and then branching that off into multiple sounds, or are you more so referring to understanding how something can can
Yes, I sub-tangented in the middle of that, but
okay.
The main thing was branching off what you said was when you make your own samples, you actually know how they were made. So that's, for me, that's probably the biggest thing. But then my side tangent was also if you make something and you make a bunch of things all based off the same kind of parent, those can also have some familiarity. So you have a pack where everything is actually from the same environment.
And
that can help as well.
Totally. It's something that I guess I do less often now that I'm doing it with this new method that I'm telling you guys about more often. But back in the day, before I even knew anything about that, I was just trying to sound design. I was writing vertically. I was like, let's just make a column. Let's just make a column of like one bar sound really good, and then move on to the next bar and try to piece it together. And doing that, a lot of the sounds that I was making is I'll just have one patch, and for one sound, and then for the next sound. And I think a part of this, because I was using Logic, I think a part of this was also just like to speed up workflow. My process was just to duplicate the track with everything on it, and then just start tweaking that into something different, rather than just like, all right, loading something new on, so like loading a new synth on, and then building it from the bottom up again. And I think that inherently, well, it did two things. It was faster workflow wise, and secondly, it kind of kept everything in the same environment, like you were saying. Like, timbrally, it's like when you have something when you have two of the same sounds, you have a better sense of, I think, where you want to go, because do I want to change it timbrally? Do I want to change it texturally? Do I want to change the note? It's easier to destroy something than it is to create something.
And if you start from a sound design session, say you start with a single sound, and then you basically, the way I see sound design is it's a bunch of branches. You can go off in all these different directions. And say you just go off in all those different directions and you make a whole pack out of it. You essentially can skip the entire process of exploring, and you have it all just in samples. And so then you can basically pick the path that you think makes the most sense, because when you have that evolution of a sound, like, where it's like it's literally morphing into sound, I find that's very interesting, in that it's basically it's automating in ways that people can't even think, because like they've never even thought of using those methods of doing it. And if you have it all in samples, you literally have all those paths already designed, and you can just kind of go through them and just grab them and put them where they need to be in a song. And
that's
dropping
so interesting.
samples is really easy, because doing that from a resampling way it's very hard to write if you're doing that level of resampling.
Oh yeah, that's something that I was trying to do before. I was like, how does Cohen sound do like these crazy bass lines that sound like they make sense and get progressively more interesting and complex as the song goes on, but still grooves. And I always thought it was like, okay, let's just figure out a MIDI pattern, and then just use a shit ton of plugins after it. And that, I think sort of that is a good exercise, because you can get some really interesting stuff with that, and it teaches you a lot, and also teaches you your CPU's limitations,
which you'll reach pretty quick.
And I know a lot of producers that refuse to do the resampling method, like refuse to render stuff to audio and then work with audio.
That's too committal.
It's too committal. Hey, and I was like that too. And what really started to break me through that was when I wrote the Recency Effect with Mr. Bill, that album. I lived with him for about 2 months, I think, or maybe it was a month and a half, back in 2016. And
that's cool.
We were working on songs, and we would kind of just like switch on and off. We'd be in the driver's seat. He'll start like a beat, and then he'll be like, make like a, how do I make this sound? Like, how do I synthesize this sound? And so I'll hop in, start synthesizing the sound, make like a bass line, do some articulation with automation, and then I feel like we got something pretty good. And he'll start to work on it, and it'll get more complex, and then he'll start doing some really complex stuff with like multiple tracks. And I mean, you can check out his Bill thing. Yeah, you check out his YouTube videos.
Yeah.
But it'll get to the point where it's like, okay, this is the top. This is totally where I was listening for. This is totally what I was imagining that it would be. And yeah, we're done. Like, we got it. And then 15 steps later is actually where his head was at. He's like, oh no, we're just getting started. And it'll get so complex. I'm just like, why is he destroying the sound? Why that was an awesome sound. And then at the very end, it's like totally recontextualized. Like, that makes sense. And he's like, all right, yeah, I'm just gonna render it to stems. This session's getting pretty slow.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, why? We have so much just like crazy innovative stuff going on right there. Like, I'm attached.
What if
to that.
I want to change a MIDI?
Yeah, what if we want to change the note? And he's like, we'll just do it in audio.
Bruh.
Fuck it.
Yeah.
And so he'll render the whole song. We had like 60 tracks of just like synths and percussion. He'll render all of it down to like 3 stems.
Whoa.
And it was just we did this for like every song. And initially it was just like giving me anxiety, and it was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to work on this anymore. And then I start seeing what he was doing with the audio, and I'm just like, wow, that actually, you're committing to deleting the past.
Yeah.
In a sense. And you have so much more.
To the future.
Yeah.
It's like throwing away the baggage that's in your brain, because when you're looking at that project file, there's so much in your brain that it fills up. And as soon as you get rid of it, it's like, poof, and it's like, okay, now we got 3 samples again. Boom. And then you can, that's actually, yeah.
That's it. Yeah. If you think that you're capping out, I guess this is advice for producers who have tons of tracks in their track, tons of audio tracks in their, or MIDI tracks in their session.
Yeah.
If you think you're, you did the best that you could with the song, and you can't get any better. Like, or if you're trying to think outside the box, trying to innovate your sound, and you're like, this is the best that I could do, render them down into just a few stems, and then
and go from there.
Just have fun with that, because it's like, I mean, just save as a new version. It's still there. It's fine.
Exactly.
Just knowing that it's fine there. You never go back to it anyway.
Yeah.
Or you rarely go back to it. But for me, that, like, I thought that I was done a song. I'll render stems for mastering. And the next thing I know, I'm in the new master session with just a couple stems that I thought was going to be a master session. Ended up maxing it out back to 60 tracks, because I'm doing all this crazy new automation and audio editing. I'm just like, wow, I never knew that it would sound like this and be this dense with just goodness. And it's fun.
Well, and it's
100%.
You're not waiting 3 or 4 minutes for a channel to pop up or dealing with crashes, and like that's where, for me, that's 100% where I start to lose creativity. Like, it becomes so much harder when, with Lost in Translation for us, it became a chore. Like, I didn't want to go back to that project file because it treated me so poorly. Every time I opened it up, I was like, what do we have that failed? Something failed. Like, I actually reinstalled my entire computer from scratch and all my entire DAW just to finish that song. Remember that?
I do. I can't remember what it was that broke.
It's because Addictive Keys broke, and I couldn't open it unless I turned it off. And then I reinstalled Addictive Keys, and then it was crashing even worse. And then I just said, I'm just reinstalling my entire computer. I bought a new motherboard, and then it finally worked okay. And then we finished the song. But when it gets that crazy, it's just like, it's such a burden on your creative process, that especially when you need to finish, because we had 190 channels on it, and we hadn't even written the last drop.
It was up over 200 at one point.
We hadn't even written the last drop at this point. So we still had to come up with a whole nother section of the song. And yeah, that's...
I 100% feel you, dude. I know the weight and the dread of that. I have a MacBook, 2014 MacBook that's been killing it for a long time. I recently, last year I built my new Windows tower, and that's all I've been using, because this MacBook, I was doing like collabs on it, and like through Zoom, like we're doing now, and we would just fill it up because collaborating. Some collaborators, it's like, they're limitless. Let's just do all the things. And I'm sure you guys know. It's like, let's max this out until the computer breaks. And then we couldn't work on it anymore. And then it's like, well, are we ever going to finish the song? And I'm just like, my computer's like out of hard drive space because like all the freeze files. And then if I delete that and unfreeze everything, it's like, it's not working. And it's just, CPU fan is just maxed out. CPU's maxed out. I'm just like, I feel like I can't breathe right now. Like, I'm sympathizing with this machinery.
Yeah. It's actually kind of funny that you would experience the opposite, where you can breathe when working with someone who does some of the most complicated things you've ever heard, like Mr. Bill. Because you would think that going into a project with him would be overwhelming, yet it's like it actually proved to be the complete opposite because of his ability to just say fuck it and move forward.
And deal with the complexity.
Yeah. Well, he's been doing it for so long, and he also considers himself, I think the term is more of a reactive producer, where it's like less methodical as far as foresight goes, and more so hands-on, responding to the natural chaos that is arising from whatever these procedural things he's doing is. It's like, let's throw this on it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like, and that's probably why I was getting so much anxiety from it initially, is because it's like, I can already hear what that's going to sound like, and it's going to just ruin everything.
Yeah.
But then he doesn't approach it like that. He's like, let's throw this on and see how it inspires me. See what the next, he's always just thinking about like, what is the next step instead of like, what is the big picture? And I think that's a lot more liberating to pose that way.
Definitely. Well, I mean, that literally exactly loops back into our first thing, which is like, how do you deal with that complexity and like not getting too lost in the weeds, right? So like sometimes you do want to get lost in the weeds, but at the same time, not at the loss of the song. So I think that it's really just the balance of that. Both approaches are 100% valid. And another way to think about it is like, you think about it's like an explorer versus a guide. The guide's going to take you up the same path up the mountain every time. The explorer is going to be like, oh, look at that. There's a really cool thing. And they go up there and they may fall off the mountain, get really badly hurt. But they figured something out new in the process. It may not be a good path. It may not be a path that everybody likes, but they will have basically tread somewhere new. And that's because they're willing to just go off and do whatever, they just look around like, I like that over there. Let's go. And then, oh, fuck, we fell off a cliff. Like,
or they found
good
treasure.
Thing I brought my parachute.
Or they found treasure. Exactly. Or they, some better place that, people wouldn't have got to. So I think both approaches are 100% valid. And I think being able to do both is super valuable, and because you really knew you gotta mix a song. Like, songs are mixed. You can't just do it however you want there. You can't use, a mono speaker. You gotta do stereo.
More or less though. I feel like there is a little bit of, like we were talking about earlier, like, why does that overdriven kick sound good?
Yeah.
Because the person didn't know what the hell they were doing with mixing, but they made a dope song, and it works. So it's important to kind of not think that I think it's important to accept that it's like we just don't know everything, and we never will. So it's like, let's have fun, take some risks.
But you're only going to learn more if you stop doing the same thing you've been doing over and over again.
That's right.
So it's like, as long as you keep yourself open to that. And I think if I have to relate something or this concept rather, to music theory, that's one of the things that I think about a lot, because some people are like, I don't want to know music theory. It limits me or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, for methodical producers, like us, we learned all these skills with how to synthesize things or whatever, and we know all these things, and because we have those skills, we end up getting limited. Like you said, you're like, I know that's not going to work. Don't do that. It's like, I know this, and you end up limiting yourself. Just like with music theory, you're like, oh, I'm not going to play these notes together because that's not right. You know? And it's like someone who doesn't know music theory, they're like, fuck it. Like, nah, maybe this sounds good. Maybe it doesn't work. And it's like, they'll write some chord progression that, ends up being like really cool that someone who knows about chord progressions wouldn't have even attempted because they just didn't think it was going to work.
Yeah,
so
dude.
it's like you want to be able to be a methodical producer. I think it's really good to have both, because if you have the skill set to be a methodical producer and make that work for you by understanding synthesis and sound design, but then you're able to remove yourself from that and then use your methodical abilities to then be a reactive producer, you're going to end up in a really good place, which is why I think it was such a good combination with you and Mr. Bill, because that album turned out awesome. So,
Yeah,
there's something to be said about that.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, yeah, if you're methodical, it's like just try to do the opposite of what your inclination is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or get ideas from somebody that's just a little crazy and a little off their rocker.
Yeah, hang out with people
new.
hang out with people that don't really do things the way you do.
Yeah.
And you might grow as a person, or you most definitely will grow as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons, one of the ways that I try to actually do it for myself is like, if I find myself constantly doing the same things, or at least making the same sounds, I'll literally just, okay, I made this sound in Operator. Let's see if I can make this same sound in Serum. Let me see if I can make this same sound in FM8. And I'll try to make the same sound on different plugins, and through that process, I will learn, not only how to use a new plugin, but I'll also learn the limitations of those new plugins, and I'll also learn, if some of them are better than others, or if there's a different approach to something. And that's kind of an easy way to not feel scared by diving into a new area, because it's like, again, bringing familiarity with something different. You get to try something you're familiar with, but in a different environment, and then it might inspire some new creativity.
Yeah. I think doing that versus let me create something completely new that I've never done before with something new that I've never used before. If you are trying to create something that you've already created so many times with another synth, you're almost it's more of like being pulled through this maze of this new thing than it is like brute forcing and pushing yourself through. It's almost like the light is there. You just have to figure out where the light is, what's the light's reflecting off of to get to the source. And that's something that I really enjoy doing when it comes to like using Serum, using stock Ableton devices only to create effects that of third-party VSTs, or to create some kind of new thing.
That's funny that you mentioned
using
that.
like Simpler as a wavetable synth. You can kind of do that. And there are ways to actually make it sound good. And through doing that and exploring it that way, I come up with new sounds that I never would have thought of before. And it's fun. And it's also something that it's fun to share with people. It's like, hey, here's this new thing.
Yeah.
Or with Serum, it's like side chaining with Serum effects. That's something that I still do a lot of the time. And I've never saw it done before. Clearly, it doesn't seem to be very intuitive to do that. But I was like, no,
you're using the distortion to do it, so it's definitely like not what its intended purpose is. I'll say that.
Right? Yeah. I'm just trying to. I mean, anyone can search it and see how it's done. But it's that kind of stuff that I like doing. It's like a very strong drive to achieve this goal with something that seems impossible. If you sit with it long enough, you're probably gonna blow your mind.
Yeah,
blow your own mind.
Yeah,
it's kind of to relate back to Joel's analogy there. It's like, instead of just exploring blindly, it's like, okay, I want to explore this mountain. Maybe I'll take the guide trip first, and then I'll come back with, a tent and a knife and a parachute, and and I will do some directed exploration with, knowing that I might be going in the right direction, as opposed to blindly digging in the sand for treasure.
Well, exactly. Yeah, because there are people, you can work on a sound or you can work on a style, and it's honestly like it's a huge cliff. There's nothing there for you, and that's, unfortunately, there are certain styles and techniques that, like, if you're making a specific style, it's really never going to sound that good with these other sounds. Then there are, I would say there are areas that you can kind of definitively say combinations of certain things are generally to be, obviously that's not a 100% absolute. There could be something there, but there are areas that you can avoid, and you can kind of, focus your efforts, in the in-between of genres. And those are kind of those areas where there's basically gold to mine. There's areas to explore that have, a much higher likelihood of coming up with something interesting that's also going to then resonate with a lot of people, versus just going off and being like, I'm going to go run over here. Hopefully there's something in this direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, it's like you feel like you're actually applying your energy to something useful, rather than just like, okay, the whole day is wasted because I was just, from an outsider, I'm literally just fucking around with aimlessly. Basically.
Yeah, no rhyme or reason, just turning knobs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that you go through. You definitely go through phases, and I think it's not terrible to do that. But when you're trying to write a song, it's very tough to do that and then actually be okay with it and actually be like, okay, this is now my idea that I'm gonna do. It's very difficult to do that when you start just from purely from scratch.
Yeah. With sound design, though, as long as you're recording, I think that could be a really cool thing.
Yeah, then you're fine.
Well, the thing with sound design is you're
100%.
already locked into the limitation of your synth, and so you just start turning knobs, and a lot of them are very musical at right off the basis. If you grab one of my Max for Live plugins, it will not sound good. Some of them are just like, they'll glitch, they'll break down. I mean, if you're Mike, you'll actually just resample your ASIO driver crashing and use it in a song.
Yeah. yes.
That
I've
was
done that.
actually pretty rad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I sent you that,
So
didn't I?
meta.
Yeah.
Something
Dude,
stupid.
one of the most
Go ahead.
the most meta thing I ever did, when I was working on communication, I was trying to show someone the song I was working on, and I took a video of the song with my phone, sent it to them on Facebook, and then I downloaded the video, ripped the audio out of it, and then put that audio into the song, and I actually used it as a part.
Whoa.
Legit.
Shit.
So that is the most meta I've ever gone
That's
inside a
cool.
song and released it.
I
Yeah,
dig that.
It was cool. Like,
Did it
added
sound
a little
good?
Lo-fi layer. Yeah, man, it added a little lo-fi
Some texture.
layer of like weirdness over top. I filtered it out, mixed it into the song, and then had it like pan through on the background, so it sounds like you can hear the song like delayed through a lo-fi delay, like going around in the background.
Called the Zuckerberg
Super trippy.
distortion.
Yeah.
Or compression.
The Zuck
Yeah, it was
compression.
Yeah, the Zuck. Anyways, I think I got to run pretty quick. It's like 4:30 almost, or 4:25. So,
all right. But yeah, just like last time, man, we'll definitely get you back on here because there's way more to talk about, and it's always super fun having you.
Hell yeah. No, this has been a blast. I mean, we're going on like about 2 hours.
yeah,
so
that was
it's
an
saying
hour
something.
54
Yeah, and
minutes.
it's easy.
So, yeah.
That's the funny part, right? It's like it's too easy to keep talking because this stuff's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is good. Thank you, guys. This
Cool.
is so
Awesome.
sick.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming by
All right.
again, and thank you for everybody that listened. Hope you enjoyed another episode.
And we'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Peace.
Bye.